The quantum communication array hummed with anticipation as the Xanthari diplomatic vessel pierced Earth's outer orbital zone. Captain Krellnax adjusted his iridescent ceremonial carapace, each segment meticulously polished to reflect the absolute precision of Xanthari protocol. Behind him, a crew of 247 perfectly synchronized administrators and diplomatic specialists waited with mechanical stillness. "Incoming transmission," announced the communication specialist, her voice as flat and emotionless as a mathematical equation. "Preparing standard first contact communication sequence Alpha 9. What happened next defied every calculation in the Xanthari diplomatic handbook. Instead of a formal, structured welcome, their communication screens erupted into a cacophony of simultaneous transmissions. Music blared from one channel, something the cultural databases identified as jazz, a form of intentional musical chaos. Another channel showed what appeared to be a live sporting event. A third displayed a cooking show, where a chef was gleefully destroying a complex recipe through what seemed like deliberate improvisation. And then, Ambassador Elena Rodriguez appeared. She wore what the Xanthari cultural analysis algorithms struggled to categorize, a blazer that was simultaneously professional and wildly colorful, with patterns that seemed to shift and change even as they watched. Her hair was pulled back in a manner that suggested both serious intent and casual rebellion. Behind her, the transmission background was a workspace that looked like controlled pandemonium. Screens of varying sizes displaying different information, people moving with seemingly random purpose, yet everything functioning with an underlying efficiency it was impossible to deny. "Representatives of the Xanthari Confederacy," Rodriguez began, her words tumbling out in a rhythm that seemed to defy linguistic predictability. "Welcome to Earth." The Xanthari delegation exchanged microscopic eye flickers, their version of profound confusion. Their entire first contact protocols were designed around a fundamental assumption that any advanced civilization would communicate with absolute clarity, structured hierarchy, and predictable methodology. Humanity was proving to be something else entirely. Rodriguez continued, her speech a linguistic roller coaster that simultaneously explained Earth's political structure, referenced multiple historical events, made 3 distinct jokes, and outlined potential diplomatic cooperation, all without a single moment of traditional linear discourse. She quoted ancient philosophers alongside quantum physicists, spoke about global governance as both a complex system and a spontaneous organic process. Captain Krellnax's translation matrix was working overtime. What should have been a straightforward communication had become a multi-layered puzzle that seemed to actively resist standard interpretation. "Our approach to governance," Rodriguez was saying, "is less about control and more about creating adaptive frameworks that can respond to complexity. We don't seek to eliminate chaos, we seek to make chaos productive." The Xanthari found this concept fundamentally incomprehensible. Their entire civilization was built on the premise that chaos was the enemy of progress, that perfect order was the ultimate goal of any advanced society. Here was a species suggesting the exact opposite, that disorder itself could be a strategic advantage. As the transmission continued, the Xanthari began to realize something profound. They were dealing with a civilization that didn't just think differently, but conceptualized existence in a manner entirely alien to their understanding. The diplomatic vessel's data banks started recording what would become millions of terabytes of analysis. Every moment of the transmission was a data point that seemed to generate more questions than answers. The Xanthari had expected a simple hierarchical introduction to a new spacefaring civilization. Instead, they had encountered something that challenged every fundamental assumption about intelligence, organization, and progress. Captain Krellnax made a decision that would be debated in Xanthari administrative councils for generations. Instead of following standard first contact protocols, he would recommend a complete re-evaluation of their diplomatic approach. Humanity had just entered the galactic stage, and nothing would ever be the same again. Behind Rodriguez, someone dropped something metallic. The sound rang out, sharp, unexpected, perfectly imperfect. The transmission continued, uninterrupted and unapologetic. The destruction of the human research vessel Horizon was supposed to be a simple border incident, a calculated show of force by the Zintheri Patrol Squadron. Captain Xerax had personally overseen the targeting sequence, his mandibles clicking with satisfaction as the energy weapons reduced the small scientific craft to expanding debris. What happened next was anything but simple. Within hours, Maya Chen emerged as the unexpected architect of humanity's response. A 32-year-old trader with a reputation for unconventional market strategies, she transformed the diplomatic crisis into a multi-dimensional economic warfare campaign that would become legendary. Her first move came through the Galactic open market, a complex trading network that most species considered a purely economic platform. Maya uploaded a series of market analyses that looked on the surface like standard economic reporting. But embedded within the seemingly mundane data were strategic insights that began to destabilize Zintheri economic interests across multiple star systems. Trading algorithms created by human developers began to move with a fluidity that defied traditional market predictions. Cryptocurrency networks aligned with the affected research vessels' home institutions started redirecting investment flows. Each transaction was a precision-guided economic weapon, targeting the intricate financial networks of the Zintheri Confederacy. This isn't about revenge, Maya explained during a live-streamed broadcast that was simultaneously a market analysis, a political commentary, and a performance art piece. This is about demonstrating the true cost of miscalculation. Her team had spent the last 72 hours creating what they called an adaptive response matrix, a complex network of economic, technological, and social interventions that would make traditional retaliation look like ancient warfare. Corporations, independent researchers, cultural institutions, and individual citizens became nodes in a distributed response system. A small tech startup in Sao Paulo released a communication encryption technology that directly challenged Zintheri surveillance capabilities. A research team in Mumbai published a groundbreaking paper on quantum communication that rendered several key Zintheri communication technologies obsolete. Artists in Lagos created a viral multimedia campaign that transformed the border incident into a global cultural moment of solidarity. The Zintheri watched in growing horror as humanity's response defied every conventional model of conflict and retaliation. Captain Xerax received his first indication that something was wrong when the financial penalties began to materialize. It wasn't a direct military strike or a formal diplomatic censure. Instead, it was a death by 1,000 cuts. Economic sanctions that seemed to emerge from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Trade agreements began to shift. Investment patterns became unpredictable. The complex web of interstellar commerce that the Zintheri had carefully maintained for centuries started to become fluid, dynamic, unpredictable. Maya Chen's live broadcast continued, a masterpiece of strategic communication. She moved between technical market analysis, cultural commentary, and personal storytelling with a fluidity that was both entertaining and devastating. She spoke about the destroyed research vessel not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity, a moment that would demonstrate humanity's true strength. "We don't seek revenge," she explained, her eyes blazing with an intensity that cut through the digital transmission. "We seek transformation." The Zintheri diplomatic corps tried to mount a traditional response. They prepared formal communications, drafted economic counter-strategies, attempted to leverage their extensive network of interstellar relationships. But humanity's response was too distributed, too adaptive to be contained by traditional diplomatic mechanisms. By the end of the week, the border incident had become something else entirely. It was no longer just a conflict between two spacefaring civilizations. It had become a global human movement, a demonstration of a fundamentally different approach to conflict, cooperation, and strategic interaction. Captain Xerax would later testify before the Zintheri High Council, his report a confused mixture of technical details and barely contained bewilderment. The humans had turned a military incident into a complex, multi-dimensional response that defied every standard model of interstellar conflict. They had transformed destruction into an opportunity for connection, for demonstration, for growth. And they were just getting started. The Zinthari High Command convened in their most secure transmission chamber, a hexagonal room constructed from quantum-locked alloys that could withstand direct nuclear bombardment. Their strategy was mathematically perfect, a comprehensive diplomatic and economic counteroffensive designed to isolate and neutralize human influence. Within 48 hours, their entire plan catastrophically unraveled. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez watched the Zinthari's response unfold with a mixture of professional analysis and barely contained amusement. Behind her, a holographic display showed a living, breathing network of human responses that looked like chaos to the untrained eye, but was actually a precision instrument of strategic engagement. The first crack in the Zinthari strategy appeared through an unlikely vector, a blockchain cryptocurrency startup founded by a collective of graduate students from 6 different continents. Their financial algorithm began to systematically dismantle the carefully constructed economic barriers, creating financial flow patterns that were simultaneously transparent and impossible to predict. Simultaneously, a global network of independent research teams began publishing a series of breakthrough papers. Each publication seemed unrelated on the surface, covering topics from quantum entanglement to sustainable agriculture, from artificial intelligence to marine biology. But hidden within these publications were strategic insights that rendered the Zinthari's intelligence models obsolete. It's not about having the most information, Rodriguez explained during an emergency briefing to United Earth's Strategic Coordination Council. It's about creating networks that can generate and respond to information faster than any centralized system. The crowdfunding campaign supporting the affected human colonists became another unexpected weapon. Within hours, millions of individuals from across Earth had contributed resources, expertise, and support. What looked like random individual actions formed a coherent, adaptive response system that the Zinthari couldn't comprehend. A research team in Mumbai developed a communication technology that could transmit complex information through quantum entanglement, bypassing traditional communication networks. A group of artists in Lagos created a multimedia campaign that simultaneously documented the conflict and provided strategic cultural commentary. Independent journalists from São Paulo began producing real-time analysis that was more comprehensive and nuanced than any official government report. The Zinthari watched in mounting confusion as their carefully constructed isolation strategy dissolved. Every time they blocked one communication channel, humans would create 3 more. Every economic sanction was met with a distributed response that transformed the punishment into an opportunity for innovation. Rodriguez's holographic display became a living representation of human strategic thinking. Nodes of information connected and reconnected in real time, each interaction generating new possibilities. The display looked like a living organism, complex, adaptive, constantly evolving. "We don't fight in straight lines," she explained to the bewildered Earth strategists. "We create ecosystems of response." The breakthrough came when the distributed network began to show emergent intelligence. Individual nodes, research teams, corporations, cultural institutions, independent researchers started to coordinate without a central command structure. It was a form of collective intelligence that defied traditional models of organization. By the end of the week, the Zinthari's carefully planned counteroffensive had become a case study in strategic failure. Their hierarchical approach had been systematically dismantled by a human network that understood complexity as a strategic advantage. Captain Krelnax, watching the unfolding disaster, made a recommendation that would change Zinthari's strategic thinking forever. Instead of continuing their current approach, they needed to study and understand this new model of interaction. Humanity had just demonstrated that in a complex, interconnected universe, flexibility was the ultimate weapon. Rigid systems break. Adaptive networks grow, learn, and transform. The Zinthari were about to learn this lesson in the most profound way possible. The Frontier Research Station hung in space like a forgotten afterthought, a ramshackle collection of modules cobbled together from repurposed equipment, solar panels, and what could generously be called creative engineering. It was precisely the kind of place the Zinthari would never consider important, which made it the perfect birthplace of a technological revolution. Dr. Aisha Nakamura adjusted her augmented reality interface, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that seemed to ripple with living intelligence. Beside her, Dr. Zorakal, a marginalized Zinthari researcher who had been exiled from their primary scientific networks for being too unpredictable, watched with a mixture of excitement and scientific skepticism. "Traditional communication networks are linear," Aisha muttered, more to herself than to her colleague. "We need something that thinks like an ecosystem." The adaptive mesh network wasn't just a communication technology. It was a living, breathing system of information exchange that challenged every fundamental assumption about intelligence, communication, and collective problem-solving. Their breakthrough came from an unlikely combination of quantum entanglement theory, neural network algorithms, and a radical approach to distributed computing. Each node in the network wasn't just a passive receiver or transmitter of information. It was an active participant, capable of learning, adapting, and evolving in real time. During the first full-scale test, something extraordinary happened. The network didn't just transmit data. It began to generate insights that no single researcher could have conceived. Complex problems that would have taken traditional supercomputers months to solve were being broken down and reconstructed in minutes. The system was learning, adapting, growing with each interaction. Dr. Zorakal watched in growing amazement as the network demonstrated capabilities that defied the Zinthari's most advanced scientific understanding. "It's not just processing information," they whispered. "It's creating knowledge." Aisha grinned, her eyes reflecting the cascading patterns of data that danced across the research station's primary display. Welcome to human innovation. The implications were staggering. Traditional communication networks were hierarchical. Information flowed through defined channels, controlled by centralized systems. The adaptive mesh network was fundamentally different. It was more like a living organism, with each node having the capacity to receive, process, modify, and redistribute information in ways that were simultaneously precise and unpredictable. A simple example emerged during their initial tests. The network was presented with a complex scientific problem, simulating protein folding for a potential medical breakthrough. Instead of following a linear computational path, the network began to approach the problem from multiple angles simultaneously. Research teams from different disciplines were spontaneously connected. Historical research data was cross-referenced with cutting-edge theoretical models. Within hours, they had a solution that would have taken traditional research methods years to develop. "This changes everything," Dr. Zorakal said, their translator implant struggling to capture the nuanced emotion in their native language. The Zinthari scientific community would later describe this moment as the point where everything changed. A marginal research station, staffed by researchers who didn't fit into traditional scientific hierarchies, had created a technology that fundamentally challenged their understanding of intelligence and communication. The adaptive mesh network wasn't just a communication system. It was a living demonstration of humanity's approach to complexity. Embrace uncertainty, create adaptive frameworks, transform challenges into opportunities. As the first successful test concluded, Aisha and Zorakal looked at each other. They knew they had created something that would transform not just human technology, but the entire understanding of collective intelligence across the galaxy. Outside the research station's viewport, stars continued their ancient dance. Somewhere in the vast darkness, the Zinthari were about to receive a message that would change everything. The Zinthari invasion fleet emerged from quantum translation space like a metallic nightmare. -1,247 perfectly synchronized vessels, each one a testament to their civilization's commitment to absolute precision and calculated military might. Admiral Krelvac stood on the command deck of the flagship, his multiple eyes tracking holographic displays that showed what should have been a mathematically guaranteed victory. Humanity had other plans. The first signs of trouble came almost immediately. Supply lines that should have been meticulously maintained began to inexplicably shift and destabilize. Communication networks developed spontaneous encryption that the Zinthuri's most advanced decryption algorithms couldn't penetrate. And the human colonies, instead of presenting themselves as vulnerable targets, transformed into something entirely unexpected. On the agricultural colony of New Terra, the invasion force encountered its first true shock. What looked like a simple farming settlement was actually a masterclass in adaptive defense. The colonists, a mix of agricultural specialists, former military personnel, and civilian scientists, had transformed their entire environment into a living, breathing defensive system. Automated farming equipment became improvised defensive platforms. Irrigation systems were reconfigured into complex water-based communication networks. Even the local wildlife had been integrated into a distributed early warning system that made traditional sensor technologies look primitive. Commander Jack Rodriguez, no relation to the diplomatic Elena Rodriguez, but cut from the same improvisational cloth, watched the Zinthuri invasion force approach with a calm that would have terrified the aliens if they could have understood it. "Activate Phase 2, he said quietly into his communication implant. What happened next defied every standard model of military engagement. The Zinthuri ground assault began precisely according to their strategic calculations. Massive troop transporters descended through the atmosphere, their energy shields at maximum capacity. They approached the primary settlement, a collection of agricultural domes and research facilities, with the confidence of a force that had conquered hundreds of worlds. They didn't realize the entire landscape was about to become a weapon. Automated agricultural drones that moments before had been harvesting crops suddenly transformed. Precision farming equipment became mobile defensive platforms. The irrigation systems that had been watering crops now created localized electromagnetic interference that disrupted Zinthuri communication and targeting systems. A swarm of modified mining drones, originally designed for extracting rare minerals, rose from hidden underground facilities. They moved with a coordination that suggested something more than simple programming. Each drone was part of a distributed network, making decisions in real time based on collective input. The local wildlife played a role that would be studied by military strategists for generations. Genetically modified tracking insects, originally developed for agricultural research, became a living sensor network. They attached themselves to Zinthuri equipment, providing continuous real-time intelligence to the human defenders. Admiral Krulvax watched in mounting horror as his perfectly planned invasion dissolved into chaos. This wasn't just resistance. This was a complete reimagining of what defense could mean. They're treating the entire planet as a single adaptive organism, one of his junior officers said, her voice a mixture of terror and grudging admiration. By the end of the first day, the Zinthuri had lost 37% of their ground assault capabilities, not through traditional military action, but through a response so complex and adaptive that it defied their most sophisticated predictive models. The human colonists weren't just defending themselves. They were demonstrating a fundamental truth about their civilization. In a complex universe, flexibility is the ultimate weapon. The invasion of New Terra was about to become a case study in the most profound military lesson the galaxy would ever learn. The diplomatic chamber was a study in architectural tension. Constructed to Zinthuri specifications, it was a perfect geometric space, symmetrical, mathematically precise, designed to eliminate any possibility of unexpected variables. Ambassador Elena Rodriguez was about to demonstrate why such thinking was fundamentally flawed. Her presentation began not with words, but with a holographic display that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. Historical data points, scientific discoveries, cultural transformations, all interconnected in a dynamic web that defied linear understanding. "Control is an illusion," Rodriguez said, her voice cutting through the chamber's carefully maintained acoustic environment. "Complexity is not the enemy of progress. It is progress." The Zinthuri diplomatic corps sat in perfect, synchronized stillness. Their entire civilization was built on a foundational belief that absolute control was the highest form of intelligence. Humanity was about to systematically dismantle that belief. Rodriguez's presentation moved like a living organism. She demonstrated how human civilization approached challenges, not as problems to be eliminated, but as opportunities to be navigated. Historical examples danced across the holographic display, how human societies had transformed seemingly insurmountable challenges through adaptability, creativity, distributed problem-solving. A Zen-theory philosopher administrator named Krellmax attempted to interrupt. But disorder leads to entropy. Chaos destroys systems. Rodriguez's response was immediate and devastating. Entropy is not destruction, she explained. It's transformation. Every closed system eventually breaks down. Only open, adaptive systems can truly grow. The holographic display shifted, showing biological ecosystems, technological networks, social structures. Each example demonstrated how systems that appeared chaotic were actually displaying profound intelligence. Coral reefs, neural networks, urban development, scientific discovery, all were presented as living proof of the power of adaptive complexity. Dr. Zarakal, the marginalized Zen-theory researcher who had helped develop the adaptive mesh network, watched from a secondary observation chamber. They understood something profound was happening. This wasn't just a diplomatic exchange. It was a fundamental challenge to the Zen-theory's entire philosophical and strategic paradigm. Rodriguez moved between scientific analysis, philosophical discourse, and storytelling with a fluidity that was itself a demonstration of her argument. She spoke about human innovation not as a linear progression, but as a complex, adaptive dance with uncertainty. We don't seek to eliminate randomness, she explained. We seek to make randomness productive. The Zen theory found this concept fundamentally incomprehensible. Their entire civilization was predicated on the idea that perfect prediction was the highest form of intelligence. Here was a species suggesting that the ability to adapt was more important than the ability to predict. She demonstrated how human research, economic systems, and social structures were designed to generate innovation through controlled unpredictability. Scientific breakthroughs that emerged from collaborative networks, economic innovations that transformed challenges into opportunities, cultural transformations that emerged from the interaction of diverse perspectives. By the presentation's end, the Zen theory diplomatic corps was no longer sitting in perfect stillness. Something had shifted in their collective consciousness. Krellmax, the philosopher administrator who had initially interrupted, now sat with a look of profound confusion and emerging understanding. The mathematical certainty that had defined their civilization was crumbling, replaced by a more dynamic understanding of intelligence and progress. "We have been looking at complexity wrong," Krellmax whispered, almost to themselves. "We thought complexity was a problem to be solved. Humans see it as a resource to be cultivated." Outside the diplomatic chamber, the universe continued its ancient dance of creation and transformation. Humanity had just offered the galaxy a new way of understanding existence itself. Desperation drove the Zen theory to their most aggressive move yet, a simultaneous attack on multiple human colonies designed to overwhelm their distributed defense networks. The Zen theory high command had spent decades developing this strategy, a mathematical symphony of destruction that should have been unbeatable. They were about to learn the true meaning of unbeatable. Admiral Krellvax watched from the command center of the primary assault fleet, his multiple eyes tracking holographic displays that promised absolute victory. 12 major human colonies would be struck simultaneously, their defenses crushed by a precision assault that left no room for adaptive response. What happened next would be studied by military strategists for generations. The first indications of trouble came almost immediately. As Zen theory assault platforms began their approach, something fundamental was wrong. Communication networks that should have been perfectly synchronized began to develop inexplicable lag. Targeting systems that had been calibrated with mathematical precision started to drift. On the colony of New Horizon, the response was nothing short of revolutionary. Local colonists, a diverse mix of scientists, former military personnel, agricultural specialists, and technological innovators had transformed their entire environment into a living, adaptive defense system. What looked like simple agricultural domes and research facilities were actually nodes in a complex, distributed response network. Agricultural drones became mobile defensive platforms. Irrigation systems generated localized electromagnetic interference. Even the planet's unique atmospheric conditions were being manipulated in real time to create defensive advantages. Commander Elena Rodriguez, now leading the Colonial Defense Coordination, moved between communication nodes with a fluidity that defied traditional military command structures. She wasn't directing a defense. She was cultivating a response. "We're not fighting," she explained to her coordination team. "We're negotiating with complexity." Each human colony responded differently, yet remained interconnected. On Mars colony, colonists used advanced manufacturing systems to generate defensive technologies in real time. The asteroid mining facilities in the Jupiter system became improvised communication relays. Even cultural institutions became part of the defensive strategy, using information warfare and cultural adaptation as strategic tools. The Xyntheri assault began to break down in ways that defied their most sophisticated predictive models. Every time they adapted their strategy, human colonies would generate multiple, unexpected response vectors. Attack patterns that should have been mathematically guaranteed began to dissolve. Dr. Zarakal, the marginalized Xyntheri researcher who had helped develop the adaptive mesh network, watched the assault in growing amazement. This wasn't just resistance. This was a fundamental reimagining of what defense could mean. They're treating the entire human civilization as a single adaptive organism, they said to a colleague, their voice a mixture of scientific excitement and philosophical revelation. By the end of the first day, the Xyntheri had lost 62% of their assault capabilities. Not through traditional military action, but through a response so complex and adaptive that it rendered their entire strategic approach obsolete. The assault on human colonies had become something else entirely. It was a demonstration of a fundamental truth about human civilization. In a complex universe, flexibility is the ultimate weapon. Admiral Krelvax watched his carefully constructed invasion strategy dissolve in real time. The mathematical certainty that had defined Xyntheri military doctrine was crumbling before his eyes. Somewhere, on a small research station at the edge of human-controlled space, Dr. Aisha Nakamura, one of the creators of the adaptive mesh network, allowed herself a small smile. This was more than a military victory. This was a philosophical transformation. The galaxy was about to change forever. The Galactic Concordance Chamber had never seen anything like it. Representatives from 247 different civilizations sat in shocked silence as Elena Rodriguez delivered humanity's final address, a presentation that would redefine interstellar cooperation for generations to come. The holographic display behind her was alive, a dynamic, pulsing representation of human civilization that defied every traditional model of organizational structure. It wasn't a hierarchy. It wasn't even a network. It was something entirely new. An adaptive ecosystem of intelligence that could rapidly reconfigure itself in response to complex challenges. "We are not exceptional because we are stronger," Rodriguez explained, her voice cutting through centuries of interstellar diplomatic protocol. "We are exceptional because we understand that strength is not about resistance. It's about adaptation." The Xyntheri delegation sat in the front row, their presence itself a testament to the profound transformation that had occurred. Admiral Krelvax, once the commander of an invasion fleet, now a diplomatic observer, watched with a mixture of grudging respect and emerging understanding. Dr. Zarakal, the marginalized researcher who had been instrumental in developing the adaptive mesh network, stood beside Rodriguez. Their presence was a living symbol of the philosophical revolution that had just transformed galactic civilization. The presentation moved like a living organism. Historical examples danced across the holographic display. Moments of human innovation, cultural transformation, scientific breakthrough. Each example demonstrated how humanity's approach to complexity was fundamentally different from any other known civilization. Traditional spacefaring societies had always approached challenges as problems to be solved, controlled, eliminated. Humanity saw challenges as opportunities to be navigated, transformed, grown. The adaptive mesh network, now a galactic standard of communication and coordination, was more than a technological breakthrough. It was a philosophical statement. Intelligence was not about prediction. It was about continuous adaptation. Rodriguez demonstrated how human civilization approached every challenge, from ecological restoration to interstellar diplomacy, as a complex, adaptive process. Scientific research became a collaborative dance. Economic systems transformed into living ecosystems. Cultural interactions became opportunities for mutual growth and transformation. Representatives from other civilizations watched in a mixture of confusion and emerging understanding. The Xanthari, who had once believed in absolute control as the highest form of intelligence, now saw a fundamentally different approach to existence itself. Complexity is not the enemy of progress, Rodriguez explained. Complexity is progress. The final moment of the presentation came with a demonstration that would be remembered for generations. The holographic display of human civilization began to shift and reconfigure in real time. Nodes of information connected and reconnected. Challenges became opportunities. Disruptions transformed into innovations. It was a living representation of humanity's true strength. The ability to embrace uncertainty, to transform challenges into opportunities, to see complexity not as a problem to be solved, but as a resource to be cultivated. Admiral Krelvax made a decision that would define the next era of galactic civilization. The Xanthari would not just accept this new paradigm. They would learn from it. As the presentation concluded, something profound had occurred. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through military might or technological superiority. They had transformed it through a fundamentally different way of understanding existence itself. Outside the galactic concordance chamber, stars continued their ancient dance, but everything had changed. The universe would never be the same again.